Get ready to ignite your Tuesday nights with a show that's as educational as it is entertaining. Welcome to Pleasure Pulse, your weekly guide to the world of sex education. Join Roma every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. exclusively on Solar Radio 96.1 FM. It's the perfect way to spice up your midweek routine and get answers to all your burning questions. Whether you're looking for relationship advice or curious about the art of intimacy, Roma's got you covered. Pleasure Pulse, every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. Only on Solar Radio 96.1 FM. Don't miss out. Your sex education journey starts this Tuesday with Roma as your guide.
Everyone, welcome to another Tuesday, another conversation on sex and something. And tonight we're talking about sex and boundaries. I feel like we have had conversations at different points about boundaries, consent, of course, communication. Well, all of those are going to be part of tonight's conversation. But as usual, before I get deep into the discussion, we're going to take a short break so that you can let everybody know that Pleasure Pulse is live on ZIZ, on Facebook, on YouTube, and on radio, of course, 96.1. So we'll take a short break, come right back, and get into tonight's conversation or discussion. Stay tuned. Pleasure Pulse. I'm your host, Roma Richardson, and I'm so happy to have you here with me for another conversation. It's a solo conversation, so it's just you and me and everybody else. You know, maybe it's a crew of you listening. So it's me and all of us together, talking tonight about boundaries. And I think this is one of those conversations that especially can inspire a lot of talk outside of the confines of sex or sex related things. So you could talk about boundaries with your platonic friends. You could talk about boundaries at work. You could talk about boundaries at church. You could talk about boundaries, parent to child, child to parent. You could talk about boundaries anywhere. So a lot of times, when we talk about boundaries, sometimes, especially in the sexual space, we could be talking about sexual specific boundaries, but we also could be talking about our boundaries in general, like in the relationships, in how we want our bodies to be held or not to be held, and how we want folks to talk to us or not to talk to us, how we want to engage with people. So tonight we're talking about boundaries inside and outside of the bedroom, but especially inside the bedroom. But of course they begin outside, because it's hard to establish, those kinds of things when we in the bed or wherever, already rolling around, getting into things. It's always better to have these conversations before we climb into bed with other people. So what is a boundary? I feel like if you're online as I am, you have heard people talk about boundaries. Boundaries have, I think, come up in especially online conversation over the last maybe couple of years, especially in therapy spaces, but outside of therapy spaces as well. And I am somebody I don't talk to my mother a lot about boundaries, and I know, and I've asked her, the other day I was talking to her about boundaries, and I was like, I know you think that is white people nonsense, but we all have boundaries. Even if we haven't called them boundaries, we know what feels good for us and what doesn't feel so good for us. So even when we're thinking about pleasure, pleasure isn't just a sexual thing. Like, we derive pleasure and we seek pleasure in lots of things. We go to the movies because movies is a pleasurable space for us. We eat certain foods, we make certain meals because we get pleasure from them, right? So we can think about pleasure also just like boundaries in terms of their relevance and application to non-sexual situations. But what is a boundary? I think just like, fences, and you got the boundary lines when you're dealing with land. And so when you're dealing with personal boundaries, it's a kind of line between like what you're okay with and what you're not okay with. And there are different kinds of boundaries. I'm not gonna get too much into it, but there's some boundaries where it's like a hard no. Some boundaries, are more porous, right? So you are working towards like healthy boundaries where it's things that you can establish and communicate with people, things that align with your values, things that align with your thoughts around your body and things like that. So it's the line between what you're cool with and what you're not cool with, or what is okay and what's not okay with you. So it's your level of comfort with different things. So you might be comfortable with something happening to you or around you, or not comfortable with something happening to you or around you. And that would mean that, you have a boundary between yourself and that thing. Now, boundaries, they differ from person to person. So just like everybody doesn't have the same values, everybody doesn't have the same feelings, everybody doesn't have the same boundaries. So depending on who you talk to, you might experience and encounter different boundaries from different person. Not might, you will experience and encounter different boundaries from different people. And they also depend on where people are, the time that they're existing in, people's personality, and the social context. Boundaries, as I said, define what somebody is comfortable doing and what they're not willing to do. And they are important for healthy relationships. So a lot of times, like even when you think about land, you could see it as this fence is something that is keeping me out, as well as the person who is inside of that space thinks of it as something that is keeping them safe, something that is keeping them protected. And that is, what a boundary is. It is something that helps to create a safe space where people can feel seen and can feel heard, and especially when their boundaries are respected. So they are crucial part in maintaining people's identity, in maintaining your mental health, in maintaining your physical well-being, in maintaining your autonomy, in maintaining your agency. Boundaries are critical for that, because if you talk to people about, like, people who have, you could talk to people about, the times that they've had their boundaries respected and times when people have crossed their boundaries, and hear from them, what that experience was like, what the feelings that they had after were like. That's a prompt to you right now. You could turn to whoever you're with and say, have you ever had a boundary crossed, or have you ever had a boundary respected, and what did you feel after, or how did you feel after? So sometimes, and I had this conversation with a friend just last week. We didn't intentionally set out to talk about boundaries, but they kind of came up. But sometimes when we're talking about boundaries, there are times when we might say yes to a thing because we feel like we can't say no. We feel like we have to say yes to it. There are times when we say yes to a thing because everybody else is saying yes. And the example that the friend gave was, she was like, when we were younger, especially like high school, and we were going to parties, different things, especially parties and events where a lot of people were going to be. She didn't really want to go because she ain't really a fan of crowds like that, and she was just reflecting on how becoming an adult now has allowed her to be able to say no to those things because she never liked them. She just felt like she had to, like everybody else in your class. We're going, and that's not to apply to everything, not like everybody doing it, so I have to, but there are rarely times when our ability to say no feels a little bit under threat and it isn't as easy. That shouldn't stop us from saying no, and I will hopefully share some tips with you that can help you to feel more comfortable saying no. But boundaries ain't only about saying no, and I want to make that clear, right? Like, it's also about saying yes to the things that you're interested in. So it's keeping yourself and other people safe by saying no when you want to say no, and by saying yes when you want to say yes. So when it comes to sexual situations or sexual activity, boundaries can define what somebody's comfortable doing or what they're not comfortable or willing to do, and the conditions that they feel comfortable engaging in whatever activity under. Now remember, I said that there's lots that you want to talk about and negotiate before you get into the bedroom situation, because when everybody hot and heavy, it's a lot more complicated and it can be a lot more difficult to effectively communicate with the clarity that you have when you are not feeling pressure, in all parts of your body and so on. So when we are in sexual situations, just like in other situations, because like, have you ever been in a situation where like, like you're feeling it in your gut, you're feeling it somewhere in your body that something feels off, but maybe you're not sure what, maybe you're not sure how to respond, you just know it ain't feel good. Like, same thing in sexual situations. Sometimes something might come up that we have a reaction to, and it's important to listen and pay attention to those reactions, to afterwards interrogate those reactions to see where it is they were coming from, because sometimes we are led into things and sometimes we don't even realize that there is pressure around us, there's some coercion involved, and we'll get into coercion too. But in sexual situations, like, sometimes people think that sex is just about your nether regions. Like, sex is a whole body experience, and your brain, your emotions are part of it as well, and they should be paid attention to when we're talking about things like boundaries and what you feel good or not so good doing. So you have to pay attention to your whole self, and doing that can help you know what your boundaries are. It can help you make decisions about things that you feel good about in the moment and afterwards. So when we're talking about sexual boundaries, we're looking at things like how people touch our bodies, and that's naked or not naked, how people see our bodies, like, whether we are naked or passionately naked or not, how people treat us in sexual situations, and that includes how they speak to us and what we're comfortable doing to others and what we're comfortable having done to us. And there are lots of things that can affect boundaries, right? And I think I have mentioned here, before about enthusiastic consent. I believe so. Since then, I have had interesting conversations that are kind of steering me into a different way, like validly pointing out that everything ain't always like enthusiastic. People could have people could maybe feel anxious about certain things, could be interested in trying something but not like happy-go-lucky about it. So I'm thinking more about, and the encouragement, the recommendation is to talk about embodied consent. And there was a time when I listened to a podcast and they talked about a full body yes, and that's like a yes that shows up everywhere in your body, like where it is able to show up. So your mind is telling you one thing and your body is aligning with that too. So it's not that you necessarily have your body sending you mixed feelings about what it is happening. But of course, you can have, like I said, you can be interested in trying something out and you could still be a little anxious about what it might mean. You could still have concerns. You could still have questions. You could be a little, I don't want to say apprehensive, but a little cautious about what could be involved, especially if it's something that you haven't done before. So you could be really interested in trying it out, but still be a little like, ooh, I wonder what this will be like, because I have never done it before and I don't have any points of reference. I don't know what the experience will be. That's okay, right? And it's also important, like when you have those kinds of feelings, to look further into them. It might mean that you have extra guidance or extra instructions for the person or persons that you're dealing with in terms of how to take care of you while you experience this new or different thing. And, like desire isn't always, as I said, a full-blown yes. It's also not necessarily and absolutely not. It could be somewhere in the middle. It could be some things that you're excited about and other things that you're not so sure about. Like, that's okay. So that's one of the things that can affect your boundaries. And it's important then, for you to do some more thinking about that. I would encourage you not necessarily to dive straight into something that you're still feeling a little on the fence about. You could do more research, you can have more conversation. You could be in a relationship where sometimes you feel great and amazing about your sexual connection, and other times you don't feel, maybe other times maybe you might feel a little bit pressured, about some things, or you might feel some way in a particular moment. That's okay. I think it's just important that we interrogate those feelings and understand what they are communicating about what boundaries it is you might have about that thing. And it's also important to recognize that sometimes the things that other people want can really influence what we decide to do and how we feel about the things that we decide to do, especially if you are a people pleaser. Coercion might not even appear as coercion, because you've been taught to fawn, you've been taught to do whatever is asked of you to please or satisfy somebody else. So I remember, when I had conversations with some of my participants from my research years ago, many of them talked about, doing something just because their partner wanted to, and just going along with it because that was what was presented to them, and they didn't want to hurt or disappoint them, and they felt like they didn't really have any choice. So that's another factor that can, affect our boundaries, and that is absolutely necessary to consider. Are you doing it because you are truly interested in or desirous of doing it, and you will derive some pleasure from it, or are you doing it solely for the purpose of satisfying somebody else? And of course, substances and so on can affect boundaries, especially in the moment, and that's why I said too, it's important to communicate boundaries before we get into the bed, before we get into substances, especially at times, especially when it is possible, because like substances can blur lines and can make it harder to articulate or speak up about our boundaries, speak up about, some line maybe that's being crossed. Depending on the substances, it might even affect how our body is reacting to something that is happening to us. So that's something to look at. And if we're using substances, it can also affect our ability to recognize other people's boundaries. So it's not just about ours, but it's about like keeping everybody safe. And of course, how you were raised and the experiences that you went through can affect how you respond in situations that require you to set or maintain a boundaries. So some of us are raised in homes where they cross our boundaries repeatedly, right? And so we learn that like our boundaries don't matter, that it makes a sense to set them, that they won't be respected, they're very like easily crossed. And I'm thinking here about growing up in, I don't want to say Caribbean homes, but growing up here, if you were able to have your own room as a child, how parents, adults, guardians, older people around us treat with the topic of like closing doors, and the fact that like they don't come and say they don't close the door in their house. And sometimes it's a matter of safety, it's a matter of like knowing that you are okay, that you are in there, that you are where you're supposed to be and things like that. But like some parents go so far as to take off door, and so far as to, even when young people try to establish boundaries around knocking, they're like, knock in my house and I by this door. So like, yeah, if you're going so fast to take off doors, and so it sends a message to that young person about the boundaries that they have attempted to set, and something that like a message that lasts them long after, until they're able to assess and evaluate like those things they heard for what they were. But as I said that, it's still important to try to approach it with a perspective of honoring people's boundaries and talking about the ones that maybe need to be negotiated because of safety concerns, because of whatever, right? But like the idea that you should be able to walk in anytime on somebody, whether they are naked or dressing, also it's like something that we need to think about. So I'm gonna let you marinate on that. We're going to take a short break, come back, and continue talking about sex and boundaries. Stay tuned. To Pleasure Pulse. I'm your host, Roma Richardson, and we've been talking about sex and boundaries. I left you at an interesting point. Maybe I are behind the abusing me, some of you right now, which is okay. I said what I said, and I meant it. But yeah, let's think about, like how we talked about boundaries applying in both sexual and non-sexual situations, how we treat the boundaries that our young people try to set with us now is definitely going to have an impact on the boundaries that they try to set as an adult. So just bear that in mind. So we might be thinking, oh, this is my house, you can do blah 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 in my house, and so on and so on and so, and thinking that it will stay there. It usually does not. Like these are things that follow people through life and make it harder for them to either set boundaries in their own relationships maintain boundaries in their own relationships and know how to respond when their boundaries are crossed. So let's just think about it in that way. Now, there can be all kinds of sexual boundaries. There could be boundaries around clothing. So, what clothes you want to keep on. So, depending on the activity that you're doing, the person might be comfortable with removing their top, but not their bottom. They might want to remove their bottom, but not their top. They might want to keep on all of their clothes. So there are boundaries around clothing, but touching you don't want. You might want some touches over the clothes and not some touches under the clothes, and vice versa. So for example, somebody might be okay with you going under the shirt but not fully touching their naked body. So it might be, I only want you to touch my bra. I don't want you to go any deeper than that. I'm comfortable removing my shirt, but not my bra. I'm comfortable removing my bra, but not my shirt. And I want you to touch me over my shirt. It could be different things. We could also have body part boundaries. So boundaries around which parts of our body we are okay being engaged with, which parts of their bodies that you are interested in touching or seeing. So you might tell somebody like, no, I'm not interested in seeing your genitals. I'd prefer if you keep your pants on. And so on, and you could tell them you're not ready to see them naked or anything like that. You could have activity boundaries, so boundaries around which activities you are okay with doing. So you might be okay with having oral sex, you might not be. You might be okay with doing other activities. Main sure if I said I'm gonna read it, so I'm gonna just leave them. I think oral sex, I want a more official term for the others. So lots of activities that are possible when it comes to sexual activity, and you can think about what you're comfortable, and note that what somebody is comfortable with on Monday isn't an indication of what they're comfortable with on Tuesday, and it's not a suggestion that like it must progress in some way. So like like how Americans will talk about first base and second base and all them things. I know we don't talk about those things, but it ain't like that ain't how it work. Like I start here and then I move there. So like every day, every moment is a new day and a new moment with new questions and new requirements to seek consent and to gain consent and to give consent. So this could also include whether you're okay with taking pictures or video or not, if you're okay with them calling you nicknames or not, if they want to be called nicknames or not. Like some people like to be called things like daddy and so on, and some people don't like it. So people have boundaries around those things. People could also have boundaries around involving other people. So they could say, I'm not interested in having a third, or a fourth, or whatever it is. You could also tell them, boundary. You could also have boundaries around like dirty talk and so on. And of course, like, for example, some people, you might be doing some kind of sexual activity and then like they smack you on your butt or something, and that wasn't something that you were interested in. So all of those things are things that we have to get consent for, and that people could set boundaries around because they might not be into like things like that. So we always have to be communicative, and like if somebody expresses that they're interested in something and we're not interested in it, like that would be the time to say that I'm not so cool with that, and I'm not, I don't want to do that. And of course, I talked about a full body, yes, embodied consent. It's important to listen to yourself, right? To pay attention to the signals that your mind and your body are sending you. And a lot of times, like, I'm not saying a lot of times, like, our bodies and our minds send us signals often. And sometimes we ignore the signals, and sometimes it would be good to listen to those signals, but they're always communicating. So for us, it's a matter of interpreting those signals and understanding what they mean. And like I said, full body, yes, is as much as is possible. Like the parts of your body that you have access to that communicate to you, like using what those parts are saying to form to form a decision. So in terms of like what you can do to ensure that we are practicing embodied consent, you can think about like some of the things that you are reacting to, and maybe not like positively, some of the things that you maybe are having some difficult reactions to, and you could always take a break. Especially if we're talking about if you're in the situation. No, you could take a break. You could tell them pause. Like so many times I've been like pause. Let's come back to that. And you could take a breath. Like if you need to by yourself, if you would appreciate the person there with you taking the breath with you, but you could let them know that you just need a break. Like things like if you feel like you're outside your own body, and so feeling like you're on autopilot, or even like feeling numb, and especially if you haven't done anything to create a numbing feeling, those are things that you can pay attention to as signs that maybe you need or could benefit from a little break. It's important to like go slow as well, especially if you're getting into new things. But even if you're not, every sexual encounter, like every sexual activity is different to every other sexual activity. Like we might engage in the same thing today that we did yesterday and feel completely different about it, because life happens. We are different people each day. We might have gotten new information about a thing. Like there's so much that can go into how we feel about the situation in the moment, right? And sometimes we don't know how we feel about the situation in the moment. But it's important, like once we start to have those feelings, to like honor those feelings, to listen to those feelings and do what we need to do. So that's like going slow if we need to, as I mentioned, taking a break if we need to. So sometimes, we could do certain things out of habit. We could do certain things because that's what we have always done, like going along with what somebody else wants, ignoring our own boundaries. Those times would be good times to be like, why am I really doing this? I've had conversations with people who have been like, they went, they did it, and then afterwards it was like, why did I do that thing? And it was because, for them it was more about doing it because either the person expected it of them, or doing it because the person wanted to do it, but not doing it because they wanted to do it. And of course, check in with your body. Like think about whether you're actually enjoying what it is you're doing. And remember I said there could be things that we are a little anxious about, trying something new. And so it's okay to try something new. It's okay to experience the thing and then say, I don't want to try that again. I love that we were so willing and open to try new things, but this isn't quite the thing that I'm interested in, doing again. Or this didn't feel exactly as I thought it might feel, because sometimes we do things because we expect certain outcomes too. So like if it didn't lead to where we thought it might have led, I think that is also okay to say. Or you might say, we did it. And I have notes. Like you might say, I think this is how we can change it up a bit to ensure that we are both like feeling good about it. So, signs in your body, like if you're holding your breath, if you're clenching your jaw, if your teeth them like sing against each other, any signs that you aren't feeling relaxed or feeling safe, especially depending on what kind of sexual activities you are doing, because some more than others, well, all of them, it's nice if you can be relaxed for, but some more than others like really require you to like fully relax. So if you are sensing in your body that you're not relaxed, it could be a sign about a boundary. It could be a sign that you maybe need to go slower than you are going. It could be that you need to take a pause. It could be that you need to do something else. So listen to all of those things and acknowledge your emotions. So don't be like, I really want to cry in this moment. I'm on the brink of tears, but I can't cry. I can't say I feel whatever way. Sometimes you start and you start something, whether it's something new or not new, and 2 seconds into it, you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. And you start to feel emotional because you don't know how to say, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, just say, pause. Can we do something else? Pause. Something is really coming up for me. I don't know what it is. Can we just cuddle? And I really hope that, you are in a space where you can do that. You should be in a space where you can, shift whatever if you need to. And interestingly, as I mentioned that, I also was talking about casual sex. I'm doing this sex workshop, sex course. We were talking about casual sex, and I don't know if I've talked about it here, but I have my thoughts and feelings on casual sex, and they tend to be different to other people's thoughts and feelings towards casual sex. But in that space, I was so happy to see that there were other people who kind of felt similarly, and that was that whether you're having casual sex or what's the opposite of casual? What's the opposite of casual? Formal. I'm not committed. Sex with somebody, I know, relationship sex, whatever it is, more serious sex with somebody. All of the bodies in those situations should be treated with respect and humanity and kindness. Like, somebody being a casual sex partner don't mean that you can see them on the road. You should see them on the road when it's raining, cats and dogs. They're caught by the gut trying to cross, and it's raining cats and dogs, they got running, and you just pass them and say, well, hope you get over. Like, that's not what casual sex means. Like, I feel like casual sex means that, if somebody's stranded, they could call you and say, hey, can you give me a lift? Anyways, that's another conversation for another time. But yeah, acknowledge all of your feelings, and I hope that you're in situations where those feelings and emotions can be respected, and we should be. And I'm gonna get into how we can support people when they tell us no, because that can be hard to hear. But before we get into how to receive a no, I want to talk about coercion, because coercion is a unfortunate thing that happens, in sex. So sometimes, and what coercion is like pressure. Someone trying to convince you to do something, and that might cause distress. It could be intense or repeated. Asking, questioning, so asking you for something again and again, even though you've said no before. Or there could be saying, You might not have said no, but you might not have verbalized no, but through your body language and so on, communicate that you're not really into it, and they kind of they might keep touching you, and you've moved their hand away, and they keep coming back, like that's kind of coercive. Not kind of coercive, that is coercive, and they could ask you something multiple times, and sometimes, and I have heard and learned about this happening, is people just like giving in. And I think I've heard something where it's like you could turn a yes into a no with like pressure or something like that. I've something that I've heard people say here. But yeah, so people who hope that like you will give up and give in, like that is coercion, and that is not freely given consent. People who make like sudden moves on us, so they jump from one activity to the next before we could even realize what's happening. So like we're kissing somebody, and then next thing you know, our clothes are off and we didn't say yes to that. It could be like, yeah, even the fact of kissing you, like you could be just there talking to each other and then they move in and kiss you, and it's something that you're kind of taken aback by. One thing I saw too, it could be like the person like getting naked and expecting that you will get naked too. It could be putting on a condom without asking if you want to have sex. So you ain't there yet, but the person is already taking steps as if you are there and as if you have agreed to it. It could be somebody inserting their penis inside you and you didn't even know that it was happening, like moving your body in a position, like turning you around or like bending you over, like things like that are all coercive and sexual assault, rapey behavior. Could also be manipulation. Like manipulation can also be a form of coercion, where people, especially I've heard, and this connects to guilt tripping too, saying, okay, like if you love me, you would want to do this, or like, oh, if you use my girlfriend or if you use my boyfriend, you would do this for me. They might even say, oh, this other person would do this if I asked them to, so blah blah blah, and it as a way of being like, making you feel like, okay, well then I have to do this if I want to keep the person, or I have to do this if I want to be the person's partner, I have to do this if I want to maintain the relationship, and so on. Could also be like shaming or punishing you, and pushing substances on you, like encouraging you to drink more when you've maybe expressed that your limit is one drink, or that your limit is one drink. And they could also change the environment. So you agreed to go out, and then next thing they're like, never mind, let's go by my house. And then where you agree, you say you're going to the movies, and they're like, never mind, let's go up on Timothy Hill. Nobody to go up there. That's just what came to mind. So, and as well as you could also be threatened. So coercion is a thing that happens, and it's not something that someone who has been coerced should feel responsible or should blame themselves for. And often we talk about, and share advice around how to say no, but we don't at the same level of, or at the same frequency, at the same intervals, with the same intensity and focus, talk to people about how to receive no. So how to say no is one thing, but we have to teach people how to receive no as well, how to hear no and leave the person alive, right? Like how to hear no and leave the person in one piece. So that's what I want to get into next. But before I get there are signs when, you don't have consent. Like, people do communicate in the language, in the ways that are available to them, how they are feeling. So sometimes somebody might give in to sex, but giving into sex is not the same as freely consenting to sex or providing an embodied yes to sex. That's all right, I guess, if you want. Like, all of those are examples, asterisk, of people giving in or acquiescing to sex. So if you hear those kinds of things, if you hear people saying I guess, if you hear if you want to, if you hear manner, like all of those things, those are signs that maybe you're not getting an embodied yes, a freely given yes. And so how do you receive either a differently communicated no like that, or directly communicated no? So of course it's hard to hear no. For some people it's harder than for other people. I know I have had a difficult time hearing no from people, and this is just in general. So if I ask somebody to do me a favor and they said no, I usually hear that as like, oh, or I have heard that as like, oh, this person hates me, like this person doesn't care about me at all. And it's usually like, oh, I would do that for the person anyways. Like, I've been learning more about like how that might be related to like some other things that's going on. But for some people it might be harder to hear no than other people. Other people can hear no and be like, okay, cool, like, I was just asking to see if you could do it. But if you can't, like, totally fine. Other people might be more like me, and other people are socialized not to expect no, not to know how to receive no, and to react to no in violent ways. Like, sometimes other people are socialized like that. Other people are taught to believe that they should always get yeses, and they will always get yeses. So we have to, reframe that thinking, unlearn a lot of those things. So a good refrain I found is that especially when people communicate their boundaries with us, like, let us know, upfront. But even if they do it in the moment, even if they do it after, it is them saying, I respect this relationship. I appreciate this relationship. I maybe even love you, and I like being here with you. I want this to continue. So I'm letting you know about this thing that really affects me. I'm letting you know about this thing that I'm not interested in doing. Because the alternative is that they will tell us nothing. They get vexed when we do it, they build resentment, and they maybe eventually like distance themselves. Like, the thing ends and maybe we didn't even know like what was happening. So when people communicate and set their boundaries with us, it's them communicating that this is my safe space and I want you to be in my safe space, and this is how we exist in this safe space together. So it's a way of communicating how they can feel comfortable. So how do you receive a no or receive a boundary when it is set with you? First, you can recognize the reframing that is happening in, the fact that they are probably communicating it with us because they value us and the relationship. So recognize that as the reason for the boundary, the background for the boundary, and thank the person for speaking up for themselves. Like, we can say, thank you for letting me know. You could say, I had no clue. Ma'am, all this time I've been texting you at 9 o'clock or calling you at 9 o'clock, and I've been disturbing you out your sleep, or I've been disrupting your time with your child, or whatever it is, like, thanks for letting me know, like, what time is a better time for me to call you, as opposed to the person blocking us because we keep calling them at that time. So you could recognize that and thank the person for speaking up for themselves. And not one activity can just be taken as that, and other activities can be negotiated or discussed. So unless the person is telling us, I'm absolutely not in the mood for any contact with you, including conversation, there is a possibility that we could, or that there are other things on the table, and that we can discuss what else could be a way of being intimate with each other, of getting close to each other. So the person might say, I'm not in the mood for sex tonight, but can we watch The Wild Robots? Because I really like it. Can we watch the Barbie movie? Can we watch Bridesmaids? The person can say that. Or the person can say, I'm not into penetrative sex. I'm okay with oral sex. That could be for the duration of the relationship. That could be for one night. That could be for the week. That could be for whatever it is. The person could set any like other kinds of boundaries with us. And it doesn't mean that, therefore, this is the end, right? So we could ask about, and maybe the boundary setter can also offer alternatives. You can feel your feelings and you can validate them, but and understand that it's okay to feel disappointed. You might even express that disappointment. So you might say, oh, yeah, I'm really sad that we can't meet tonight, but I understand that we can't meet this week, but I understand that it's exam time for you and you really want to focus on your exams. I'm going to miss you, and let me know if you have 5 minutes in there, or you could reach out if you happen to have any available time or whatever, or I'll look forward to seeing you next week or whatever. So you should feel your feelings, you could validate your feelings. You could understand that it's okay to feel whatever you feel, but it's not okay to pressure somebody. This song, not pressure nobody, daughter. Yeah. So, yeah, it's not okay to be like, oh, I'm mad at you, blah, 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 and then you continue and it becomes this whole thing. Like, it shouldn't become a whole thing when the person is setting a boundary with us. We should not argue with people about their boundaries. In the moment, we might want more information, because I'm a person, like, I don't want information. So I want to understand, like, what is going on, because there could be other things that, I have thought about doing or have done that connect to this boundary. But that ain't the time to talk about it. Like, just because then it can come off like a back and forth about the thing. The person might feel like they have to justify their boundary. That's not what we want. We want just to like acknowledge it, be grateful for it, and at another time you can say like, are you open to getting more into or getting deeper into like this specific boundary that you have? Yeah. And yeah, like I said, don't make it about your disappointment or your sadness. Like, that shouldn't be what the conversation should be about. The conversation should be about your gratitude for the person bringing you into their space, and feeling comfortable with you enough, feeling interested in you enough to want you to remain in that space. And finally, remember that the best sex is sex that everybody is into. That should be like a mantra. Everybody should be into the sex, and that is like a good marker, a good way to assess, what's going on with the people around us. And like I said, people use all sorts of tools and strategies to communicate that, whether it is their body language, whether it is their words, whether it is sign language, whether it is actions that they're doing with their body, like moving away, pulling away, moving your hand, things like that, right? So if you're in doubt about something, you can ask. But if people are giving you those, kind of clear signs, especially if it's not a situation where like you have agreed that will be part of the sex, because sometimes like that could be part of the sex. If you haven't agreed that, then that is important to talk about it. And by that I mean, like, you could be doing BDSM, you could be role playing, and part of your role play is acting out something, like running away. Like part of your role play could be running away, and like you could be flying and grinding. Like you could be running and hiding, and the person has to catch you, and if they catch you, so it could be lots of things involved. But if you have not had that discussion, if you have not agreed that that is what the situation is, and people are reacting to you like that, that is a good time to pause. If you need to ask, although I think it's clear. Just pause and stop and, shift. Everybody take a break. But yeah, remember that the best sex is sex that everybody is into. Tonight, I don't usually give homework, but I want you to take tonight, the rest of the week, however long it takes, to think about your own personal boundaries, sex-wise and non-sex-wise. Discuss them with the people around you. I think we'd be all interested to know what our friends' boundaries are, what our family members' boundaries are, what our children's boundaries are, what our partners' boundaries are, what our sex buddies' boundaries yeah. So thank you for joining me for another Tuesday night, another sex conversation. Remember that Pleasure Pulse is a safe space where no question is too big or too small. Use this week, like I said, to think about your own boundaries and to practice setting some of them, and practice receiving boundaries and receiving no's from people. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a pleasurable evening. Goodbye.